So, good morning, everybody. My name's Toby Colquhoun. I'm a senior analyst with IHS. Today I'm going to present some of the results from our recently published embedded report, as well as some interesting industry data. So this slide, just a very quick roadmap, very basic overview of the industry, but provides a bit of a framework for understanding my presentation. A key take-home point is that the merchant market is kind of buffeted by these three very large opportunities: semiconductors, captive sales, and the pull from end-user markets. And our market is, to an extent, say, buffeted by those external factors. Just starting at semiconductors, semiconductors actually had a really positive year last year. Last year, sales rose by about 10%, which was very positive because we rely on the innovation and the technology investment from that industry that drives the investment in our industry. By contrast, the two previous years saw very weak or no growth. So that begs the question, what exactly do those end-user sectors look like for Vita components? As you can see, about 80% of sales in 2013 were accounted for by defense customers, and then a small majority for the rest of those industries. Now, what's really interesting is that if you compare this to the total embedded market, you see a very different picture. So once again, if you look at all form factors like XTCA, modules, motherboards, and so on, then about 25% of the market is industrial, 23% is commercial communications, and then about a fifth is defense, 20%. So a very different picture for Vita components. So what's going on in defense? So this slide I took from some of my colleagues that look at the defense industry full time. Reasonable question to ask, why I focused on the US defense industry. Well, due to kind of the peculiarities of history, the US accounts for 40% of defense spending worldwide, but punches way above its weight in terms of electronics. So for Vita members, it's a destination of about 75% of their sales. So if the US defense market catches a cold, it has a big impact on what's going on in the defense industry for Vita members worldwide. And this chart illustrates a few interesting trends. So as you can see, the industry reached a bit of a high watermark in 2010 in terms of budgets. And since then, two very important things have happened. Spending has fallen as a proportion of GDP, and the nature of that spending has changed. So broadly, you can classify spending between budgets that keep things going and ticking over versus investment in new capabilities, looking at new technologies, looking at new threats. And what we've seen is that the proportion going to the investment side is at a historic low. So 2014 was the lowest amount of spending going towards that investment piece for a long time. And unfortunately, we don't see the defense budget coming back either in terms of magnitude, either in terms of mix, although we do expect 2015 to slightly increase its portion going towards those investment categories. That's not to say, of course, the US doesn't remain an incredibly important destination for these components. And this slide just breaks out the market by the budget by service branch. Now, what we've seen, once again, if you look to the past, the Army was the largest service and received the lion's share of the budget. Of course, as existing commitments in Iraq and Afghanistan have wound down, the Army's budget has shrunk, and the Navy's budget and the Air Force's budget has grown. But consequently, even they have to deal with fewer ships and fewer aeroplanes. In terms of program detail, we still see things like cybersecurity, unmanned platforms, simulators, special forces as very high priorities for this administration. So on a more positive note, looking towards industrial markets, so machinery, process manufacturing, what we see is a very strong increase in capital expenditures in those industries, and that's driven by sectors around the world. As we see that the market's really driven by Asia these days, as India and China have undergone their industrial revolutions. Somewhat uneven performance by sector. So what we see is that sectors that have a relatively inelastic demand for their goods, like power, water, those guys are doing the best, driven by demographic trends, aging population. Pharmaceuticals is an interesting one. So we see, once again, support from demographic trends, like the aging population requires more drugs. But even in areas you might expect, like Mexico or in China or in India, these guys are consuming more drugs per capita as well as they're mimicking some Western lifestyles. By contrast, the stars of last year, like metal extraction, oil and gas, those guys are doing worse as commodity prices have fallen. There's less money to pay for new projects from profits. And these projects can be massive. So if you guys have been watching the news, last Friday, Shell announced that it was cancelling just one refinery, and that refinery alone had $6.5 billion of expenditure attached to it. Looking towards transportation, we see this market as one of the hottest in the industry, growing at 9% CAGR CapEx terms, driven by some of the same drivers that we talked about before, like demography changes, the emergence of emerging markets, but also urbanization. So in 2010, it was estimated that about 50% of the world's population live in cities, and by 2050, the WHO think that about 70% of people will live in cities. Obviously, there needs to be a corresponding investment in infrastructure to keep things going. And electronics should track even above this rate as devices become smarter, become instrumented for the first time, and so embedded computing can benefit at an even higher rate from this trend. So just to get back to Vita, this slide breaks out the market size for the most popular form factors, both at a board and system level. Once again, if you caught my talk last year, you see the same trends that VME accounts for by far the majority of sales. But I'm going to stick my neck out and say by 2017, we'll see VPX exceed VME sales for the first time. And once again, if you look at it on a design wins basis, that's already happened and has happened for a few years, but we just need to catch up to the point where those projects are shipping and revenues are recognized. So that's the clear direction for the future. Final slide. So just some closing thoughts. The Vita market is well developed, has a rich ecosystem, clearly faces some headwinds, but historically the industry's coped with them very well. And I've got every expectation they'll manage some of these challenges in future. That was it. I think I've got some time for some questions.